It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Congressman Michael Waltz from the 6th District of Florida. He's a native Floridian, and he's a graduate, though, of Virginia Military Institute. He served in the Special Forces during the war in Afghanistan, and he has the distinction of being the first Green Beret elected to Congress. Congressman Waltz serves on the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and we're very lucky to have him here today to speak to us here at the Humans to Mars Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you so much, and I do promise I won't drone on too long. I understand I'm your last speaker, which means I'm the only thing between you and drinks for the end of the day. So, I heard a statistic earlier today that actually is really sticking with me, and that the average person touches space 36 times a day and doesn't fully realize, right, the extent to which space is touching every aspect of our daily lives and is really underpinning our modern society today. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about today and focus on, though, is the national security element of that. And I am one of the only members, actually there's only 2 of us out of 435 that are on both armed services and science, space, and technology. So that means we have oversight of the Air Force, of the National Reconnaissance Office, and all of the military components, the National Geospatial Administration, NSA, all of it, plus obviously NASA and NOAA. And one of the great things about the U.S. government is that it's rather large and well-funded and can throw a lot of resources at an issue. That's also one of the bad things about the U.S. government, is it throws a lot of resources at issue, and it isn't always knitted together in the most effective strategy. So for me, as now being elected to office, I've really taken it on to help Americans realize how dependent we are and how this infrastructure that has been up there for the last several decades must be defended going forward. So, as you all know, every time we send a text message, every time we check the weather, we use the phone, how I got here today, we grab a coffee, we are interacting with some way in space. It has really been astounding to me. I didn't fully realize until being on the committee that how interdependent our financial system, our ATMs, the stock market, modern global communications, are all dependent on space. And frankly, it's impacting our lives now more than ever and is only going to increase and grow. So, obviously, human exploration, the American pioneering spirit, are a fundamental part of our DNA, and it's one reason, I believe, space is one reason that America is so exceptional. I am confident in the United States' ability to pioneer and explore and lead the world again, not just to the moon, but to Mars and even beyond, and I'm really, really excited about it. But what I want to discuss today that is just as important as our efforts to explore space and other worlds is national security. And while we normally talk about space as an exploration issue, it's also a national security imperative. Space isn't just a matter of colonizing another planet, to be candid. It's a matter of protecting ours and protecting what we have here. So, our military's ability to fly, to fight, to coordinate our tanks, our aircrafts, our divisions, are wholly and completely dependent on space. Our entire system now, having been a warfighter overseas, is utterly dependent on GPS. And we're not the only ones that know that. As I'm sure you've seen, the Chinese have demonstrated an anti-satellite and anti-space capabilities, a lot of which I can't get into in this forum. But they are sophisticated, the Chinese are dedicated to doing it, and it's growing. Bottom line is, in any type of future conflict, our adversaries are not going to take us on by ship to ship, aircraft carrier to aircraft carrier, tank to tank. They're going to go after what all of those entities depend on, all of which is sitting up in space. So the warfighting domain has been completely dependent on space for years now. It's time our national security strategic approach and strategy is structured to take the threats posed by China and Russia seriously. And we are starting to see that pivot, not just from the Air Force, but by our entire national security apparatus. Just last month, Vladimir Putin vowed publicly to modernize his country's space industry. He vowed and set some very ambitious goals of doubling the productive capacity in their rocket and space industry by 2020. He wants to upgrade all of Russia's aerospace industry and to compete with other space powers, including ours. But it's not just Russia, our traditional kind of opponent in space. A new Department of Defense study, which I would encourage everyone to read, the public version of it, recently detailed China's investments in space-based intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, and anti-satellite missions. So without getting into too much detail, but if China can put things up in space that can repair satellites, then that means they can put things up that can also attack satellites as well. But unlike the United States, China does not have a NASA equivalent. I know, that's not news to most of the folks in this room, but I think to the broader public, it bears oft repeating. Everything that they are doing has a military component. Every astronaut that they have up there comes from the People's Liberation Army and through that training and through that system. So everything they're doing, all of their space assets are backed by the military. This means that their primary focus now, as enunciated by President Xi, is military space dominance and supplanting the United States as the world's dominant power. China and Russians aren't the only one. India is also launching. As you know, Israel just launched. That this capability is proliferating. The United States must invest in maintaining that leadership role that is so central to our economy, but is also so central to our military that is defending a global liberal world order. So the new space race is on. There's a lot at stake. I think in order to protect those assets, America too must prioritize our space investments. We're making that case day after day and week after week within the Pentagon. Thankfully, President Trump and Vice President Pence fully understand the importance of space from a national security standpoint and the seriousness that it requires and frankly, the investment that it requires. Creating a space force, a lot of people make jokes about it. Fine, make your jokes. But it is an absolutely critical investment. I'm fully supportive, and I think it's something that is overdue and we absolutely need to do. It is imperative for the modern space race. And President Trump's leadership in this regard, overcoming a lot of resistance, it just can't be overstated. So, I use the analogy with air power and where we've gone with the Air Force. The Air Force was part of the Army until 1947, and we broke off, created a separate branch. I think that was absolutely needed and is what led to our dominance of air power since World War II. I think we're at that same inflection point. We need to break the Space Force off and give it recruits unique types of individuals, acquires unique types of technology, needs to have an equal seat at the table in the Pentagon when we're making tough resourcing decisions that I don't think it will have if it remains wholeheartedly part of the Air Force. So again, I'm just fully supportive. The other piece that I'm really excited about, and I say this as what I call a small government conservative, is I'm really excited about what the private sector is doing. We have a lot of momentum from what I call quote unquote new space. And the new space industry or commercial space, which is just in incredible ways leading the charge for how we're improving our edge and improving our technology and doing things like the private sector is so often doing it efficiently, doing it fast, building risk, into its models, not being afraid to take those risks and moving forward at a pace that I just don't think you would see candidly coming out of a wholly government-run program. This new space industry is testing its capabilities. It's launching every 8 days from Cape Canaveral and the Kennedy Space Center, which is just south of my district in Florida. Center to my district in Florida in Daytona is Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So to me, the new space paradigm and this new space race is also an icebreaker for STEM and where we need to go in STEM and how we're going to have the workforce of the future, not just in STEM, but in manufacturing technical capabilities to be able to fuel the private sector. And I've had a lot of conversations and a lot of roundtables back in my district of how we get folks, not in high school, not in college, but in elementary school, and invested and excited about STEM. Every time I have a manufacturer, I just had some in my office earlier today that are coming to me and saying, we have so many people. This is a societal issue. We have so many people in that pendulum that have swung towards liberal arts, four-year liberal arts degrees, that if I could be completely candid, I think in many ways are not the best return on investment. If you're going off and getting a 4-year degree in equestrian studies and loaded up with $250,000 in debt, I don't think you're going to see that return on investment. I think you're going to see that entire paradigm start to shift, where you see people. I'm excited to see companies like Siemens and Netflix, Blue Origin and others that's saying, you don't have to have a 4-year degree to come work here. Where you have this kind of continuum of workplace and education that is very relevant to what they're doing. But I also put a finger in their chest when they're complaining about this issue and saying, how many apprenticeships are you sponsoring? How much are you doing? Not for internships in undergrad and grad school when somebody's already charted their course, but in middle school and in elementary school and in summer jobs and in workplaces. How many vocational roundtables, how much vocational training are you sponsoring and you investing in? They need to take a 10, 20-year view, not a 2-year view, and then look to government to kind of help fix the problem. So that conversation, I think, still needs to be had, and I would encourage all of you to have it as well. Look, I think at the end of the day, what I'm so excited about is just the massive industry that space is going to be. The statistics that we're seeing is by 2045, we're going to grow from $500 billion industry, where we are today, to $2.7 trillion in terms of the space economy. That is an economic free market driver that should just have everyone, I think, really fired up. My job is to help with the regulatory structure and frankly, getting government out of the way in many ways to let that grow and to let that flourish, and so that our regulations and our laws keep pace with this innovation. But for me, as long as I have the private sector leading the way and government is trying to catch up, that's a better dynamic than government in the way. And that is a dynamic that I'm absolutely committed to. So, one of the primary goals of the commercial industry is to make space travel consistent and to drive down the price of launch. I mean, if you look at what commercial space has done in terms of taking launches from 500 million to downward as much, as low as 50 million, just in the last 10 years, that is absolutely incredible and exciting and needed to get the things up into space that we're going to need to get in order to eventually be able to get to the moon. So, I could tell you, I just sat down with Administrator Bridenstine, who I heard kind of knocked it out of the park and had a great speech. He actually used to when he was a congressman, be in my office. So we had a little bit of old home week last week when he came by, and we were really able to, in many ways, I'm following in his footsteps in that he was also in Armed Services and on the Space Committee, but wasn't a physicist or a scientist by background. I'm a knuckle-dragging Army guy, but that doesn't mean that I'm not really excited about this and want to show some leadership on it. He's excited about it. His plans are coming to fruition. Obviously, this means building the most powerful rocket in the world in SLS. That now with Vice President Pence's direction, are not just going to launch humans around the moon, but are going to put humans on the moon. I'm sure you all saw that meant a $1.6 billion budget amendment, which NASA just delivered. And now part of my job is to get that through the Congress. And you won't have a bigger supporter than you do right here in getting that through. So my question, thank you. My question, though, to Administrator Bridenstine and to all of NASA is, have you fully wrapped your minds around, and the entire community, have you wrapped your minds around doing what NASA has traditionally done in an uncontested space, one that we dominated and I think, frankly, took a little bit for granted, and now one in a contested space? And how does that factor into the planning? And how does that factor into the entire dynamic in the budget? So are we prepared, to have a gateway around the moon that can also be defended? Are we prepared to have a lunar lander that can also be defended? Because again, China just announced its plan to put a manned research station on the moon in the next 10 years. Well, again, not to insult anyone, but I just think I'm going to keep pounding the table. That research station, let's call it what it is. That's a military base. That will be manned, funded, and put there by the Chinese military. That's not to be overly hawkish. That's not to be an alarmist. But I think we need to, our community needs to have its eyes wide open to really what that means moving forward. So, look, I know this for certain, that just as America's successful journey to the moon in the 20th century provided countless innovations for both our economy and our national defense, I fully expect this current endeavor to the moon and beyond to provide similar benefits to humanity. For me, space is the fabric of my community. Florida has been in the site of some of the biggest moments in space. Space is an important piece of my home state's history. As you all know, before Neil Armstrong made that one small step for man and giant leap for mankind in 1969, where did he launch from? From Florida. And when we do it again in 2024, the next astronaut to walk the white craters of the moon and look down on Earth will also launch for Florida. And if I have it my way, in addition to being the first Green Beret in Congress, I'll be the first Green Beret on the moon. So look, this is an exciting time, but I just want to leave you today with a call to action. We have a unique moment. Sit the politics and the vitriol and all of those pieces aside for a moment, if you can. Tough call in this town, but if you can. We have the president. We have the vice president. We have a Secretary of Defense nominee, but I expect to be the Secretary of Defense that comes from aerospace and comes from industry. We're on the cusp of a sixth branch of our armed service dedicated to space, and we have a private sector that's exploding. I mean, this is truly a unique and exciting time. And here's the but, and here's the call to action. The average person in the United States right now cannot withstand a $400 unexpected expense to their savings account. They can't withstand that in just living in paycheck to paycheck. So my call to action to you is to be vocal and enthusiastic advocates for why this matters to our economy, why this matters to our national security, for all of our freedoms that we hold so dear. So when you're talking to your neighbors, when you're talking to your community, when you're in your annual Thanksgiving argument about politics or whatever, is to keep making that case. We all cannot get so into this bubble that we aren't constantly making the case for space, and why it's critical to American leadership, and why, just as we breathe free air with a free press and a free market and a free society here, why it is imperative that we project that everywhere beyond Earth as well. Thank you so much. God bless you all, and thank you. Appreciate it. All right. Thank you.